Greetings, Fire Chargers, Darkblade here, and in this video I will be reviewing Chapter 1 of On the Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian Context, an Illustrated Journey by Dr. David A. Falk. Thought I was gonna sneeze or blow my nose. The first chapter, from pages 1 to 22, is titled Discovering the Ark for the First Time. The prologue basically describes the significance of the Ark, and then the section What is the Ark goes into what the Ark is. The chapter also goes into the terminology surrounding the Ark in the Covenant and Conspiracy section, along with what a covenant even is. There's also Bezalel's story, the imaginative retelling. There are parts in here that kind of threw me off because the dates that I saw here, especially for Pharaoh Ahmose I, are quite a bit different from what I'm used to seeing. Wikipedia. And there are also some parts that confuse me with their dating, like page 8. Where it says, when King Seti I, circa 1303 to 1288 BC, broke the ground for Kantir for his new residence, Bezalel was still a boy. The interminable war that had begun 16 years earlier continued to seesaw in the Levant in a series of indecisive military interactions. Now, if the war began in the first year of the war between Egypt and the Hittites began in the first year of the Pharaoh I. That's the one in between. It's the second to last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, in between Tutankhamun and Horemheb. That's 1323 BC, and continued for his 4 years. Then the 14 years of Horemheb, then the 2 years of Ramesses I. It would have lasted 20 years by the time Seti I ascended. So this imaginative retelling gets a lot into deep Egyptian history. It also gets into the titular character, Bezalel, talking about how he was dropped off by his father to work in an Egyptian trade school or ancient Egyptian trade school. It's called a workshop. Sorry about that. There are also some photos and illustrations in this book that are by Dr. Falk himself. Talks about how Bezalel grew up and learned about this craft of making Egyptian ritual furniture, various forms, and also domestic furniture. Fun fact, according to Dr. Falk's playthrough of Assassin's Creed Origins, furniture in ancient Egypt is a sign of wealth. At one point it even shows Bezalel in a conversation with his master. If you want to see that, check pages 9 and 10. Though take a shot at some point in page 10, because it has Bezalel's master saying that the Asiatics, that's what Bezalel is part of, worships Baal, Resheph, and Astarte. And I have decided that on Dr. Falk's weekly Q&A live streams and on other media related to him, that I would create a little drinking game, and one of the rules of the drinking game is every time Dr. Falk says ball, rechef, and Astarte in that exact order. Another condition is whenever he says the word dead when talking about Jonah or Osiris, or when not talking about Jonah or Osiris, but still manages to rope them in on a sequence of him just saying the word dead. Oh yeah, and the shots have to be ancient Egyptian beer or some other type of non-alcoholic beverage. Then it also gets into the story of the Exodus, though from Bezalel's point of view, though it's also third person to Bezalel himself. Also, it just does not really go that much into Moses. It just says, oh, one day Moses appeared and brought plagues, and this new God that we haven't heard of. Then Dr. Falk goes into the Exodus date that he used to write this whole Bezalel narrative, which is the late Exodus date, which says generally that the Exodus occurred around the mid 13th century BC during the reign of Ramesses II. And he gets into the history of that date and its main rival, the early date, which holds that the Exodus happened in the 15th century BC generally, not to be confused with the super early date, which puts the Exodus like before 1500 BC or during the reign of a pharaoh whose real dates, not revised dates, their real dates were before 1500 BC. An example of a super early date view can be seen in the first Patterns of Evidence film. Though the actual date proposed does not look that much different from a standard early date due to the chronological revisionism. Anyway, Falk also gets into several of the issues with the early date, which in his own words have made it impossible for me to adhere to it, page 15. These issues include the toponymy in the Book of Exodus, specifically the name Ramses and the city of Ramses, which did not exist in any form prior to about 1300 BC, and also the Amarna letters, which span from about 1355 to 1330 BC, so roughly the reign of Akhenaten, but beginning a few years earlier, ending a few years later. All of these diplomatic letters that Egypt received. I need to Google them and use. Anyway, the exciting thing with this device is that it lets you pause videos while recording them. And the exciting things with the Amarna letters is that they showed us what the Near East, they gave us a picture into what the Near East was like in this roughly third quarter of the 14th century BC. And they are also useful for chronological reasons by providing numerous synchronisms between Egyptian pharaohs and various rulers in West Asia. For example, here are some of the synchronisms shown on page 15. The Babylonian king Bernabariash II is linked to Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep II, Akhenaten, and Tutankhamun. And by the way, his predecessor, Kadashman Enlil I. By the way, Enlil is the name of a Mesopotamian god. He's also called Ashur. That's another one of his names. Many Mesopotamian gods have like 2 different names. Is linked with Amenhotep III and Ashur-uballit of Assyria, 1358 to 1323 BC, is linked with Akhenaten. This shows that Amenhotep II, the pharaoh ruling during the supposed early date, it has his actual reigns down about 1425 to 1399 BC. Actually, Dr. Falk's book actually says 1423 to 1399 BC, but I just decided to include his entire reign, including those first 2 years co-regent with his father. So that's right. He became pharaoh in 1425 BC. Remember that. 1425. And Amenhotep II was 18 years old when he became pharaoh. That means he was born in 1443, 1444 BC. Do you know what that means? 1446 BC is before Mr. Amenhotep II was even born. Think about that. He also goes into archaeological issues with the early date, mainly stemming from combination of the Amarna letters and the Bible itself. For example, the destruction of the city of Hazor by Joshua. Joshua must have been at least 20 years old at the Exodus, because like a few days or weeks after the Exodus, he personally goes on to fight some Amalekites who ambushed them at. And so he must have been at least 20 years old during the Exodus. By the way, these figures for Joshua's age are not coming from Dr. Falk's book. They're coming from my own reading of the Bible. So assuming that Joshua lived a full 110 years, that means the latest possible date that he could have died is 90 years after the Exodus. So that is 1356 BC on the most popular iteration of the early date. Yet, the city of Hazor, which is credited as having been destroyed by Joshua, was still extant and being ruled by King Abditirshi, which I think means servant of something. And I don't know what Tirshi means. It means during the time of the pharaoh Akhenaten. And also, Hazor was continuously occupied from about 1470 to 1200 BC. And he also goes into the main in biblical support used for the early date and why that isn't as strong of an argument as people may originally think it is, and shows why the late date much more or accurately aligns with what the Bible and external archaeology says. So that is all for my review of Chapter 1 of the Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian context, an illustrated journey by Dr. David A. Falk. Goodbye, Fire Chargers. Make sure to like and subscribe. Dark Blade out.